Hello, my name is Denise Vasquez, and today I will be presenting the Odyssey and the Penelopiad. So there are many similarities and differences between Margaret Atwood's The Penelopiad and Homer's The Odyssey, which it is based off of. So Margaret Atwood made many of these differences to focus on the female characters in the original text and to emphasize the unfair treatment of women before and during the original composition of Homer's The Odyssey. Additionally, the Penelopiad both used the content of the original Greek text and critiques the misogyny and the bias towards women in Homer's The Odyssey. So readers can learn from the comparison of Homer's Odyssey and Atwood's The Penelopiad that classic stories are often limited by the male perception, and by considering the experiences of marginalized groups such as women and the poor, there is a depth that adds to the original text. So similarities. Both the Odyssey and the Penelopiad recount the events that followed the Trojan War. Additionally, both Penelope and Odysseus make mistakes in their leadership that lead to the deaths of their subordinates. Lastly, both the Penelopiad and the Odyssey show their main characters' experiences in the underworld. So the purpose of these similarities. The Penelopiad and the Odyssey are similar because they both involve the same characters. They both involve Penelope, Odysseus, and Telemachus. The similarities between Penelope and Odysseus emphasize their heroic qualities. So Penelope, in her scheme with the death shroud and unweaving it and weaving it again in order to keep the suitors at bay, that shows her cleverness. Additionally, her leadership abilities are shown when she basically rallies and uses the maids in order to assist her with the suitors. So these qualities of cleverness and leadership are also shown in the Odyssey in Odysseus, when he uses his cleverness to escape the Cyclops and also uses his leadership to get the majority of his men away from the Cyclops, and to decide which of his men will go to sacrifice them to Scylla or Charybdis. Lastly, the presence in the underworld also emphasizes their difference. So Penelope, she retells the story from her place in the underworld, where she remains because of her experiences in the underworld. Because of her experiences in the land of the living in her first life, she's afraid of continuing it in the modern world, which she considers it more dangerous. So she stays safe at home in the traditionally feminine domestic area of the underworld. However, Odysseus, we see him in the Odyssey. He travels to the underworld to speak with Tiresias, the prophet, and it's the kind of the conventional Greek hero going to and returning from the underworld in order to assert their power over the feminine underworld and also over death. And even in the Penelopiad and even in death, Odysseus continues to do that. He chooses to continuously be reborn rather than to stay with his wife in the domestic area of the underworld. All right, so next we have the differences. The Penelopiad includes Penelope's childhood and the beginning of her relationship with Odysseus, which is not included in the Odyssey. Next, in the Penelopiad, the story is told through prose and periodic chorus poetry, while in the Odyssey it is completely an epic poem. The narrative recounts events from Penelope's and the maid's perspective, while in the Odyssey it is told through third-person perspective. In the Penelopiad, Telemachus behaves rashly and disrespectfully towards his mother. However, in the Odyssey, he behaves more, or is portrayed more, heroically. Lastly, the gods play a large part in the Odyssey, but do not appear at all in the Penelopiad. Alright, so what are the purposes of these differences? So Atwood's inclusion of Penelope's past adds to her character and her experience as a woman. So now we know that Penelope was quite young. She was about a teenager when she married Odysseus, kind of putting an uneven power balance between the two. And so we also get to see her interactions with him when they were married. Additionally, Atwood's decision to include the maids as the chorus connects the Penelopiad with original Greek plays, such as Euripides' Medea and the Bacchae as well. The Penelopiad tells a story from the view of Penelope and the maids to focus more on women's experiences and to shed light on them, which is not shown in the Odyssey. The Penelopiad explicitly discusses the character flaws of male characters in order to humanize them. And so Penelope does this with Telemachus, when he is portrayed as rebellious and unnecessarily disrespectful towards his mother, and potentially even planning to take her power from her in order to put himself on the throne. Additionally, Penelope also addresses the character flaws in Odysseus, which are slightly addressed in the Odyssey, but not as much as in the Penelopiad. Lastly, the absence of the gods from the Penelopiad emphasizes that women are mostly dismissed. So the gods are very involved in Odysseus' life, especially Athena and Zeus, who sends messengers to assist him. But we don't see that very often in the Penelopiad because I suppose because the women are dismissed so much, the gods do not feel the need or feel the interest to become involved in their lives. Alright, so Penelope is one of the biggest differences in these books, even though she was portrayed as quite clever and, an equivalent to Odysseus in the Odyssey. The Penelopiad takes it to another level, and she is more evenly described as clever and leadership. It's more explicitly shown. Additionally, because we are seeing the world from her perspective, she is able to call out the issues of Odysseus' character flaws. So she notices his dishonesty, and in the Odyssey, Odysseus' cleverness his dishonesty is considered an aspect of his cleverness. So it is just completely dismissed and not seen as immoral or disrespectful or anything. Next, she notices his arrogance and his cleverness and bends her own intelligence to seem less than his. So this is especially notable in his scene when she sees him in disguise when he first returns to their home. She knows that it's him, but in order to basically keep him from feeling like he didn't do a good enough job in his disguise, she pretends to not recognize him. Additionally, she reacts towards rumors of her husband cheating on her with goddesses. So it is actually presented as infidelity rather than just an aspect of the heroic journey as it is in the Odyssey. Lastly, she addresses the fact that after returning home, he immediately leaves. So in the Penelopiad, he makes an excuse that he needs to basically purify himself from the blood of the suitors that are on his hands, and he just, after spending 10 years after the Trojan War getting back to Penelope, he leaves again. And this is shown again in the underworld when he continuously leaves instead of staying with the wife that he says he loves so much. Okay, so one of the other biggest shifts of focus in the Penelopiad are the maids. They weren't very significant in the Odyssey, but they are in this book. The portrayal of the maids in the Penelopiad emphasizes their significance to Penelope's story. So the girls' bad experiences as poor children emphasizes the men's and the wealthy's responsibility for their bad experiences. Penelope bonds with the maids through their covert unweaving and weaving of the shroud, and this likely shows the kind of community that develops among women that are struggling to live in a world and a society that is controlled by men, whereas in the traditional Greek male model of heroes, they attempt to attain glory mostly independently. They follow her orders to get close to the suitors to spy on them, endangering themselves. So they're completely loyal to, the maids are completely loyal to Penelope and endanger themselves to the point where they're taken advantage of by the suitors. Next, Odysseus orders Telemachus to kill them for choosing the suitors over loyalty to Odysseus. And this is shown in both the Odyssey and in the Penelopiad. Penelope's guilt over the matter reveals her feelings of responsibility for their death. So she actually takes responsibility. She does say that she took a large part of raising them, and she feels a large responsibility for their deaths. Lastly, the maids are portrayed as poor girls unfairly punished, while the Odyssey, presents them as deserving of their end, basically blaming the rape victims. So what can we learn from these differences and similarities? So the focus on women in the Penelopiad emphasizes the dismissal of women and the romanticization of Odysseus in the Odyssey. The retelling reveals the relevance of Odysseus' story and Greek mythology in today's world. A lot of the qualities that are shown in the Greek text are reflected in the Penelopiad, which also in turn reflects the issues of the current age in terms of, women being dismissed, the infidelity, and also sexual assault. Lastly, the myths and epics can be readjusted to fit current critical theories such as feminism. So in this age, because women are given access to education and we have just evolved as a society a bit more, we are able to address violence towards women and unfairness towards women and other shows of misogyny in the media that we consume. We are able to critique it and also correct it, as Margaret Atwood does in the Penelopiad. So in our conclusion, the similarities and differences between Atwood's The Penelopiad and Homer's Odyssey emphasize the importance of retelling myths from the perspective of previously silenced groups such as women. Next, the Penelopiad shows the mistreatment of women by addressing infidelity and sexual assault and critiquing the behavior of the hero Odysseus. Lastly, readers may learn from comparing the Penelopiad with the Odyssey that the original story is still relevant today. While the Odyssey reflects its time of composition, the Penelopiad reflects the feminist perspectives of the current age, which critiques misogynistic media. All right, and that is all for today. Thank you so much for listening.